Chapter 1. Serena Cade's fingers hovered over the console, the flickering green lines of code reflecting off her glasses. Her pulse quickened as she bypassed the final security layers of Nebula Station's central database. The glow from the terminal illuminated her face, casting long shadows across the sterile white walls of the control room. Each line of data she unlocked seemed to echo through her mind like a distant drumbeat, louder, faster, and more insistent. This was it, the truth that could change everything. The deep hum of the station's engines vibrated through the floor, a constant reminder that they were light years from any known planet. But here, at the heart of the station, the secrets that had brought Serena to this place were beginning to unravel. She had come to investigate a breakthrough, time travel, an invention capable of altering history itself. But what she'd uncovered wasn't a hopeful leap forward. It was a dangerous path to control. Dr. Cade, we need those results by tomorrow. A voice crackled through her calm, jolting her from her thoughts. It was Magnus Arlen, CEO of Chronotech, the private corporation behind the time travel research. His voice was smooth, almost too smooth, like the surface of a polished stone. Serena's fingers paused mid-flight. The voice wasn't just a simple reminder. It was a subtle command. Magnus had a way of making even casual requests feel like orders. Understood, she replied curtly, her voice betraying nothing. She turned back to the terminal. The data was massive, classified files on every time manipulation test Chronotech had conducted. Initially, she had been intrigued. The potential of time travel was limitless. A chance to reverse the environmental destruction that had ravaged Earth, to prevent wars, to save lives. But now, as she combed through the encrypted files, the reality was becoming clearer. Magnus Arlen wasn't interested in saving anyone. The screen flickered, then displayed a sequence of names. Key historical figures. Some she recognized immediately. Others were lost to history. Ambassadors, scientists, military leaders. Each one had a series of timestamps next to their names. These timestamps weren't related to birth or death dates. No, these were moments of intervention. She scrolled down further, her heart pounding in her chest. No, this can't be, she whispered to herself. The file contained detailed plans, magnificent blueprints for rewriting history, erasing people from existence, and manipulating events for corporate gain. They weren't just studying time, they were controlling it. Serena's fingers trembled as she scrolled through the plans. The moment the timeline is altered, it stated all records of the erased figures will be expunged. Not even the memory of them will remain. Asterisk, asterisk. She paused on one name, Catherine Donovan, a well-known diplomat who had once negotiated a peace treaty between two warring factions. Under the altered timeline, Catherine Donovan never existed. The treaty had never been signed, and the war had continued for years longer than it should have. The implications were staggering. If Chronotech succeeded in erasing key figures from history, what would happen to the future? What would remain if the foundation of civilization were to be rewritten piece by piece? A sudden noise from behind her sent a shock through her body. Serena turned quickly, but the dimly lit hallway outside the control room was empty. She pushed herself from the desk and made her way to the large observation window. The view of the station's exterior was breathtaking. Countless stars and nebulae stretched into infinity, their soft glow reflecting off the cold metal hull of the station. But tonight, she couldn't appreciate the beauty. Tonight, something had shifted within her. What had she stumbled upon? A soft ping from her comms device broke her reverie. She tapped it reluctantly. Serena, we need to talk. Lucien's voice came through, urgent yet restrained. Lucien Hawk was a fellow scientist at Chronotech, someone she had worked with closely during the early stages of the research. He had been one of the first to raise concerns about the project's direction, but he had vanished from the public eye after a confrontation with Magnus. Now he was reaching out. What's going on, Lucien? She asked, her voice tight. I've been watching the data streams, he replied, his voice low. You need to get out of there, Serena. They're watching you. They know you're onto something. Serena's heart skipped a beat. She glanced over her shoulder at the darkened hallway, the hairs on the back of her neck standing up. What do you mean they know? I can't explain everything right now, but trust me, you're in more danger than you think. Get to the lower levels of the station now. I'll guide you. Her mind raced. Lucien's warning couldn't be ignored. There was no time to waste. She pulled up the schematics for the station's layout and traced a quick route to the lower levels, where the restricted files on time manipulation were stored. If she could get there, maybe she could find more evidence to expose Chronotech's plans. But the station was vast, and every move she made was being tracked. Serena had no illusions about that. The very walls of Nebula Station were watching her, and Magnus Arlen would stop at nothing to keep his secrets buried. With a quick glance at the terminal, she secured the data and slipped into the hall. The hallway was quiet, eerily so. The lights flickered above her, and the cold metallic walls stretched infinitely into the distance. A light footstep echoed off the metal floors. Was it her imagination, or was someone following her? She picked up the pace, her footsteps echoing against the emptiness. Her breath came faster now, and every corner felt like a trap. But as she approached the first stairwell leading to the lower levels, her communicator buzzed again. "This is your last chance, Serena." Lucien's voice crackled, frantic now. "You need to get to the vault, secure the files, and leave the station. Don't let them control time. You don't know the consequences." No one does. Serena's pulse thudded in her ears as she reached the stairwell. The vault was down in the lower level, where all of Chronotech's most secretive research was stored. This was the moment. But as she descended, a cold realization gripped her. The technology they had developed wasn't just a tool. It was a weapon. And she was in the crosshairs. The game had changed. The door at the bottom of the stairwell clicked open. Serena pushed it forward, slipping into the darkened corridor beyond, and with it, the weight of what she had to do next. Chapter 2. The steel doors slid shut behind Serena with a hiss, sealing her into the station's lower levels. The flickering lights overhead cast long shadows, and the silence felt heavier here, more oppressive. Each step echoed against the cold, metal walls, and every inch of the place seemed to stretch endlessly in all directions. The oppressive atmosphere weighed on her, making her realize just how isolated she was. Nebula Station was enormous, but it might as well have been a prison, and now she was trapped within it. Her heartbeat quickened, and for a moment she considered turning back. But that wasn't an option. She had already seen too much, known too much. There was no going back. If Magnus Arlen and Chronotech succeeded, they would rewrite history, controlling the future with nothing more than a keystroke. She couldn't let that happen. Lucien's voice crackled in her ear. "I'm tracking you, Serena. You're on the right path. Head towards the restricted sector. There's a vault there. Don't stop for anything. The files you need are inside." Serena didn't need any more convincing. She knew the station's layout better than anyone, but the lower levels, where Chronotech's most sensitive data was stored, were heavily protected. Only a few people had access to these vaults, and now she was one of them, for the moment at least. The corridor before her seemed to stretch into an abyss. There was no telling how far down she had descended, but she could feel the weight of the station pressing in from all sides. The low hum of the engines, normally a soothing background noise, now felt like a constant reminder that something dangerous was happening. Time itself was at risk. She had to move quickly. Don't think about the consequences. Focus on what you have to do, she whispered to herself, trying to steady her nerves. Her boots clicked against the polished floors as she moved deeper into the station. The walls around her were adorned with sleek, minimalist panels, each one hiding layers of security that would make breaking into this area feel impossible. Yet, Serena had learned the shortcuts. She knew how to bypass security, how to evade surveillance. She turned a corner, spotting the first security checkpoint. The guards were stationed up ahead, their movement robotic and predictable. They were waiting for someone like her. She knew this wasn't a random coincidence. Somehow, Magnus must have been tracking her. He'd already discovered that she was digging too deep. Her hand went to the small device in her pocket, her personal bypass key. It was a simple tool, small enough to fit in her palm, but it had the power to disable station cameras and lock doors. She pressed a button, and the station surveillance system flickered for a moment, the guard's eyes glazing over as the cameras cut out. Taking a deep breath, Serena moved swiftly, using the momentary blindness of the system to slip past the checkpoint unnoticed. But the tension in the air was palpable. The guards had no idea she was here, but they wouldn't stay blind for long. She had minutes at best. Turning down another hall, Serena finally reached the access panel for the restricted vault. She paused, fingers poised above the keypad. The silence in the corridor seemed unnatural now. Too quiet. She'd learned that Magnus always kept things under tight control. Nothing was ever too quiet. "Lucian, I'm at the vault," she whispered intercom. "Give me the code." "I've sent it to your terminal," Lucian's voice replied, his tone laced with urgency. "But be quick. I've traced a signal to the security room. They're about to lock down the station. You've triggered an alert." The hairs on the back of Serena's neck stood up. This was it. The moment she entered that vault, she would have everything. The proof. The files. But that would also mean a direct confrontation with Magnus. There would be no going back. With a swift motion, she entered the code, and the vault door slid open, revealing rows of secure containers filled with data cores. It was a treasure trove of stolen knowledge, everything Chronotech had been hiding. Serena grabbed the first data core she could reach, inserting it into a portable reader. The device buzzed to life as the encrypted files began to load. But as the data streamed onto her device, a soft, rhythmic sound echoed through the corridor. Footsteps. They were coming. Her heart pounded in her chest, and panic threatened to rise. The clock was ticking, and time was no longer on her side. Magnus was already hunting her down. "Lucian, I've got the files," she muttered, backing towards the vault door, her eyes scanning for an exit. "But they're already on their way. I need extraction. Now." "I'm on it," Lucian's voice said through the comm, but there was something strange in his tone. Something off. "Serena, listen to me. You need to be careful. You're not just up against Magnus anymore. There's a team of operatives, highly trained. You don't have much time." A door opened behind her. Serena whirled around, her pulse skyrocketing. A figure stepped into the dim light. It wasn't a guard, but one of the operatives, Elliot one of Magnus' most trusted lieutenants. "Serena," Elliot said coolly, his voice devoid of emotion. "I was hoping you'd make it this far." Her hand instinctively went to the bypass key in her pocket, but before she could make a move, Elliot raised his hand, palm open. "Don't bother. The system's locked down. You're not going anywhere." Serena's mind raced. This wasn't just about escaping now. It was about surviving long enough to expose the truth. She didn't respond immediately, her eyes flicking over Elliot's shoulder to the approaching security team. "We both know why you're here," Elliot continued, stepping closer. "Magnus has already made his decision. You're either with him or you're in the way. And people in the way don't last long." "I'm not going to let you control time, Elliot," Serena replied, her voice steely. "I've seen what you're doing, and I'm not going to let you erase people from history. No one has the right to rewrite the past." Elliot chuckled softly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You think you're the first to have these ideals? You're naive, Serena. The world is changing, and whether you like it or not, we're the ones shaping that future. You're too late to stop it." Serena felt the weight of his words, but they only strengthened her resolve. She couldn't let him win. In a flash, she turned, her hand shooting to the bypass device. The vault door closed with a mechanical hiss, sealing her in. She had no other choice. She ran. "Get her!" Elliot yelled behind her, but Serena didn't look back. It wasn't over yet. The files were still in her hand, and that was all that mattered now. Chapter 3. Serena's breath came in sharp, ragged bursts as she sprinted down the corridor, her boots pounding against the polished metal floors of Nebula Station. Behind her, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed, growing louder with every passing second. They were closing in. Her mind raced faster than her feet. Elliot and his team were relentless. She had barely managed to escape the vault in time, clutching the data core in her hand, but now the station was alive with the sound of pursuit. No matter where she turned, there was nowhere to hide, not with the station's security systems on high alert. Every move she made was being tracked. Her comm buzzed in her ear. It was Lucian, his voice crackling with urgency. "Serena, what's your location? You need to move faster. Magnus is onto you. The entire station's gone into lockdown. They'll be locking down all exits soon. You've got maybe 10 minutes, 15 at most." She glanced behind her. Elliot's voice carried in the air now, cold and determined. "I know where she's going. Stop her. Do not let her reach the escape pods." Serena's pulse quickened. Escape pods? That was her only chance. Lucian had set up a route to one of the station's emergency exits, an outdated service hatch, far off the grid, hidden from the main security system. But getting there was the problem. The station's layout was a labyrinth of hallways and maintenance tunnels, and every corner was a potential trap. She forced herself to calm down. Panic wouldn't help. She had to stay sharp, think fast. "Lucian," she hissed into the comm, the pod route. "I'm on my way, but they'll be waiting. I need a distraction. Can you cause a breach in the security grid?" Lucian's response came through in a split second. "I'm trying. The system's tight, but I've hacked into the station's backup generator. It's not much, but it should cause enough of a ripple to disrupt their tracking for a few minutes. That'll give you time. Do it," she replied, her heart thundering in her chest. Serena darted around a corner, her hand instinctively gripping the small bypass, key tucked into her jacket. She slammed the device against the access panel, and the lock on the next door clicked open. Behind her, the distant sound of boots grew nearer. They were gaining ground, and she had no time to waste. The door opened into a narrow, dimly lit maintenance tunnel. Serena stepped into the passageway, her footfalls muffled by the thick metal flooring beneath her. The walls seemed to close in, the low hum of the station's engine barely audible now in the quiet. The stifling silence felt suffocating. It was as though the station itself was watching her every move. "Lucian," she whispered urgently into her comm, "what's happening? Have you triggered the breach?" "I've initiated it. The power grid is glitching. Just a few seconds now." "Serena, move fast." She didn't wait for a response. The urgency in his voice told her everything she needed to know. She was running out of time. As if on cue, the corridor lights flickered, and a loud, buzzing noise filled the air. Serena's steps faltered. The breach had begun. A surge of hope surged through her. This was her chance. But just as quickly, that hope was dashed by the sound of footsteps echoing behind her. Elliot. He wasn't far now, and from the sharpness of his voice, he knew exactly where she was heading. "Don't make this harder than it has to be, Serena," Elliot's voice echoed through the dark tunnel. "We both know you can't outrun this." Serena's fingers tightened around the data core. The file she had taken was more than just a set of encrypted records. It was proof of Chronoteca's manipulation of time itself. Magnus Arlen's twisted vision of rewriting history would be exposed if she could just get it to the right people. A sudden burst of noise erupted from the walls, the sound of the station's backup generators kicking into overdrive. Sparks flew from one of the nearby panels, momentarily blinding her with a flash of light. The grid had been momentarily disrupted. The surveillance cameras on her were down. For a brief moment, she was invisible. She had a few minutes of grace. "Go, go," Lucian urged in her earpiece. "You're almost there. Just one more corridor, and you'll hit the hatch." Serena pushed forward, her legs burning as she pushed herself harder. The hatch was within reach. She could see it at the end of the tunnel, a small, unassuming door tucked away behind a series of maintenance panels. But then a cold voice rang through the intercom. "Serena." She froze, her heart skipping a beat. The voice, low, authoritative, and unmistakable, belonged to Magnus Arlen. "You've been a valuable asset, Serena, but your actions have crossed a line. There is no escape for you now. Come back, and we can fix this together. You don't understand the importance of what we're doing. We're shaping the future. We're saving humanity from itself." Serena's breath caught in her throat. He had found her. "I'm not coming back, Magnus," she said, her voice sharp, a hint of defiance creeping in despite the fear clawing at her insides. "What you're doing isn't saving anyone. You're manipulating time to build your own empire. I'm saving humanity, he replied, his voice tinged with frustration. What you call manipulation, I call evolution. Time is a tool, Serena. The past is malleable, and I am shaping it to protect the future. The world will thank me when they understand. Serena's hand gripped the bypass key tighter, her knuckles white. The door was only a few feet away. Think about it, Serena, Magnus continued, his voice now softer, more persuasive. You know what we're capable of. You've seen the data. We can undo the wars, the disasters, the mistakes of humanity. Isn't that worth any cost? Serena didn't hesitate. No, the cost is too high. You're playing with lives. You're erasing people. Erasing memories. That's not fixing anything. You'll regret this, Magnus warned, the calmness in his voice now replaced with anger. You have no idea what you're up against. But Serena didn't listen. Her focus was fixed on the hatch ahead. She had come this far, and there was no turning back. With a final burst of speed, she reached the hatch, slamming the door open. She didn't wait for it to close behind her, just ran into the dark, narrow escape tunnel beyond. As she pushed forward, the sound of footsteps faded, and the low hum of the station seemed to dim. The emergency hatch was still ahead, but she knew the clock was ticking. The truth had to get out. She couldn't stop now. Now when the future of humanity was on the line. Chapter 4. Serena's legs burned as she sprinted through the narrow maintenance tunnel, the dim emergency lights casting eerie shadows on the walls. She had barely made it past the security checkpoint, but the hardest part wasn't over yet. The hatch to the escape pod was still ahead, and with every step she took, she could feel the weight of what she was carrying. The data core that could expose Chronotech's dark plans. The air was thick with tension, and for a moment, she dared not breathe too loudly, afraid of being heard. Elliot's team was still hunting her. She had narrowly avoided capture, but the real danger was just beginning. She could feel the chase growing closer with every passing second. The sound of her footsteps echoed through the hollow tunnel. The escape hatch was near. She could already feel the cold, metallic handle under her fingers, as if it were beckoning her to freedom. But the cold dread clawing at her insides wouldn't let her forget the stakes. Lucian, she whispered urgently into the comm, her voice tight. Where's the pod? Tell me exactly where it is. There was a brief pause before Lucian's voice came through, sharp and clear. You're almost there. It's in the northern quadrant, near the lower cargo bay. You have to bypass the main security grid. They got eyes everywhere now. You don't have much time. Serena's fingers gripped the bypass key in her pocket. She needed to act fast. The last thing she wanted was to be caught, not with the data core so close to being exposed. Chronotech had gone too far, and no matter the consequences, she couldn't let Magnus rewrite time. She rounded another corner, the sound of heavy footsteps growing louder in the distance. They were getting closer. Stay focused, Serena, she muttered to herself, forcing her feet to move faster. Sweat clung to her forehead, and her heart hammered in her chest, but she couldn't stop. Not now. The tunnel narrowed even further, forcing her to crouch and slide through a low-maintenance hatch. Her pulse quickened. If she could just get to the pod, she could send the data to the authorities, expose everything. It wasn't just about stopping Magnus anymore. It was about saving the future from the power he so desperately sought to control. Almost there, Serena. You've got one last access panel to bypass. Lucian's voice came through again, a little more strained now. I've already triggered the distraction on the outer grid. You got a window. She didn't respond, instead focusing on the end of the tunnel, where she could see the faint light of the emergency pod bay door. It was just a few steps away. The walls of the station seemed to close in around her, but she pushed forward, the end goal in sight. Then suddenly she heard it, a sharp, metallic clang, the sound of a door opening. Elliot. He had found her. She stopped dead in her tracks, her breath catching in her throat. It was too late. She couldn't make it to the pod in time. Serena. Elliot's voice called out from behind her, flat and emotionless. It's over. Stop running. Serena turned slowly, her pulse racing. There was no time to reason with him, no time to explain. He was one of Magnus' most trusted lieutenants, and his loyalty to the CEO was unwavering. She knew what would happen if she gave up now. Elliot wouldn't hesitate to stop her. Elliot, you don't understand what you're doing, she said, her voice steady despite the growing dread in her chest. This isn't just about you and me. This is about the entire future of humanity. He cocked his head, a slow, almost pitiful smile curling at the corners of his lips. I understand perfectly, Serena. You've always been idealistic. But you don't get it. We are saving humanity. We are shaping the future. You've seen the data. You've seen the potential. Serena's hand gripped the bypass key tighter. Shaping the future? No, you're erasing it. Magnus' plan will destroy everything. He's rewriting history. People will disappear, And you're so sure that people like you, people who have always failed to understand the bigger picture, should make the decisions for everyone else. Elliot's voice hardened. You think the chaos of the past, wars, pandemics, environmental collapse, was the right way to go? History isn't some abstract concept, Serena. It's a tool. We can fix it. The words stung, but she refused to let them sway her. Magnus' vision was not the future she wanted. A future where time was controlled, where the past could be rewritten, was a future where nothing was real anymore. History wasn't a tool. It was the foundation of who they were, of everything they had learned from. Don't do this, Elliot, she said, her voice tight with emotion. I know you're not a monster. This isn't you. Elliot stepped closer, his eyes cold and distant. You're wasting your breath, Serena. I'm not here to listen. I'm here to stop you. With one swift motion, he reached for his weapon. Serena barely had time to react, but she wasn't going down without a fight. Her hand shot out to the panel next to her, pressing the emergency override. The station's power grid flickered for a moment as the emergency lights in the tunnel flickered, sending a pulse of energy down the corridors. The backup generator sparked, throwing the entire section of the station into temporary disarray. Elliot cursed and stumbled back. Serena didn't waste a second. She bolted forward, her feet pounding against the floor as she ran for the emergency hatch. Just a few more steps. Behind her, she could hear Elliot cursing, the sound of him recovering from the surprise glitch. But she didn't look back. She couldn't afford to. This was it. The emergency hatch loomed ahead, its cold metal door already standing ajar, as if it were waiting for her. It wasn't a safe escape, but it was the only option left. Serena dived into the pod bay, slamming the hatch shut behind her. She didn't pause to catch her breath. There were no more chances. The pod's systems flickered to life as she activated it, her hands moving quickly to input the coordinates. She could already hear the low rumble of alarms blaring somewhere in the distance. They would come for her soon enough, but right now, it didn't matter. The pod was lifting off, and with it, she had a chance to escape. Lucian, she breathed into the calm, her voice finally shaking. I'm on my way. It's done. I've got the data. Lucian's voice came through, a mixture of relief and admiration. You did it, Serena. Now, we take it to the council. Serena sat back in the seat, the pod rising into the dark void of space. She could feel the weight of what she had just done, the tension easing slightly, but the truth still hung in the air. She had stopped Magnus, but for how long? And what was the true cost of rewriting time? The pod drifted away from the station, and for the first time in hours, Serena allowed herself to exhale. The battle wasn't over yet, but she had taken the first step. Chapter 5. Serena stared out of the small viewport of the escape pod as it drifted farther from Nebula Station, the massive research hub shrinking into a distant speck of light against the vastness of space. The rhythmic hum of the pod's engines was the only sound that filled the cabin, but it did little to calm the storm inside her mind. Her fingers absently traced the smooth surface of the data core that lay beside her, still tightly secured in the protective case. She had it, the evidence that would bring Chronoteca's twisted plans into the light. But what next? She had run from a system that would erase history and manipulate time itself, and she had narrowly escaped the hands of Magnus Arlen's operatives. Now, she was alone, a fugitive in the dark void of space, with a single chance to make sure that the truth reached the right people. But was it enough? Her calm buzzed, breaking her thoughts. "Serena, are you all right?" Lucien's voice was clear, though there was a subtle strain beneath it, like the weight of what they had just done was beginning to settle in. She leaned forward, pressing the button to open the connection. "I'm fine," she said, though the words felt hollow. "About the data, it's all in here, but we're not out of the woods yet. We won't be until the council gets their hands on it," Lucien replied. "And that's not going to be easy. Magnus won't stop. He'll send everything after you." Serena's grip on the data core tightened. She knew he was right. Magnus Arlen was not a man who gave up easily. The moment she had exposed Chronotech's operation, the game had changed. But even if the data made it to the council, would they believe it? Would they act in time? Or would they let the corporate giant continue its grip on the future? The pod's trajectory adjusted slightly, and the engines hummed softly, shifting toward their destination. It was set for the neutral space station where the Intergalactic Council convened. She was about to enter the heart of bureaucratic power, an arena where politics, red tape, and corruption often outweighed moral clarity. "You'll need to keep the data safe," Lucien continued, "but don't make the mistake of trusting anyone there too quickly. Magnus' influence runs deeper than you think. You may not be the only one on their radar." Serena nodded, though she knew Lucien couldn't see her. He was right to worry. She had seen the way Magnus operated, always staying one step ahead, bending the truth to his will. But this time, he had underestimated her. Her mind flashed to the moment she had narrowly escaped Nebula Station. Elliot's cold voice, Magnus' twisted logic, and the fact that so much was riding on the small data core that now sat beside her. It was proof of Chronotech's crime, but would it be enough to bring down the empire they had built? The pod's autopilot announced their approach to the station, and Serena pulled herself from the dark thoughts swirling in her head. The next part of the journey would be just as dangerous. Minutes later, the pod docked with the space station, the mechanical hissing of the locks sounding off as the outer door sealed shut. Serena didn't waste a second. She grabbed the data core, tucked it securely under her arm, and headed for the exit. The hum of the pod's systems faded behind her as she stepped into the docking bay. The station was buzzing with activity, crew members and travelers moving along the vast corridors, their faces a blur as Serena navigated through the halls. She didn't have the luxury of taking her time. She needed to find the right contacts, the right people who could help her get the truth to the council. But trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. She moved quickly, passing through security checkpoints and flashing her credentials, an authorized researcher from Nebula Station. But there was a nagging doubt in the back of her mind. Who could she really trust? Her thoughts were interrupted as a figure stepped into her path. "Serena Cade," the man said, his voice smooth but laced with something cold. "I've been expecting you." Serena stopped, instinctively reaching for the bypass key in her pocket, but the man raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "Easy. I'm not here to make things difficult. My name's Neil Calloway. I'm with the Council's investigative unit. We've been watching Chronotech for some time." Serena studied him carefully. His face was hard to read, but there was something about him that made her uneasy. The last thing she needed right now was another person pretending to be on her side. She'd learned that lesson the hard way. "I don't have time for games," she said flatly. "What do you want?" "I want to help you," Neil said, his eyes locking onto hers. "I've been briefed on the situation. We know about Chronotech's manipulation of time, but there are factions within the council that are hesitant to act. They need proof, Serena. Real proof. That's where you come in." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I can get you the resources you need. We can work together to expose Magnus and his operation once and for all. But we need the data." For a moment, Serena's gaze shifted to the data core in her hand. Could she trust him? Would he betray her too? "I've been hunted for this," she said, her voice steady. "I'm not handing it over to just anyone. You have to prove to me you're with the right people." Neil's face remained impassive. "I understand your caution, but I've been tasked with ensuring this operation succeeds, Serena. Chronotech has too much influence for the Council to ignore. Magnus will do everything in his power to stop you. The truth needs to come out. And it will asterisk asterisk if we act quickly, asterisk asterisk. There was again the promise of action. But was it the truth she wanted? Or was it just another person trying to manipulate her for their own ends? Serena hesitated. She had no choice but to play the game. Magnus was still out there, and she needed allies if she was going to survive long enough to expose the truth. "All right," she said, meeting Neil's gaze. "But you keep your end of the deal. No more lies." "Of course," Neil replied, a faint smile playing at the corner of his lips. "I'll ensure that." With a final glance at the data core in her hand, Serena nodded. The next chapter of the fight had begun. The truth would come to light. But at what cost? The pod doors behind her hissed open, and she stepped into the unknown, ready to face whatever came next.